We've talked about how cheap your fish are, how cheap a lot of products made in China can be at their just base item cost before you calculate everything else. It takes a little while, but I want to talk about something that is prominent in pretty much every industry out there nowadays, but the fish industry is one that does it in a way that we can best understand. And that is the planned obsolescence of pieces of equipment and technology. They're intentionally designing it to make more money off of us. Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to talk about planned obsolescence and how philosophical changes purely for the purposes of corporate profits have changed over a period of time and how that has affected us hobbyists in the aquarium industry. We're going to do a little bit of history and a couple of product examples, but again, like some of the previous ones we've talked about, where we've talked about like fish prices, and we've talked about product quality, like building the XY380 sponge, right? The atypical sponge that is kind of similar in size to the aquarium co-op sponge. There's lots of little things here, so we're going to speak very broadly, right? Because there are lots of details that are either A, I can't go on record about based on some conversations with some industry friends, or B, it's hard to specifically talk about those things without just like needling one company, and that's not what I want to do. Because it's not just one company, it's kind of everybody in the industry. So first off, let's talk about kind of a broad historical understanding, and we'll do this as fast as possible. Back in the 50s and 60s, for a lot of pieces of equipment, it was really common to have lifetime warranties. Now, they didn't cover everything perfectly, but they covered a lot of stuff. And over time, there was this shift in order to make more money into what was called service-level warranties. So lifetime warranties went away, and you would have these extended warranties or these coverage programs that you could purchase that would act as your warranty, where you were continually paying either a yearly fee or a monthly fee, as how we would see it nowadays. And one of the best examples of this actually came from the Sears company. I have intimate knowledge of this because I used to have this when it was offered for a very, very long time. Both as a kid, I knew about this, and up into the home I am in today. For about the first 5 years of living in this home, I had this plan until they discontinued offering it. And they made it so expensive it was no longer worth it. But basically what this was a household coverage warranty that you could purchase for a yearly fee. And any appliance or piece of electronic equipment that you bought through Sears, back when Sears was a go-to company for many, many of us here in the United States, was covered. You would just, as you bought it, they would auto-add it to your home coverage plan. It's changed names many times. And what would happen is, should anything go wrong, if it was within the initial warranty of the device, that would get covered. You never had to worry about anything. But otherwise, beyond that, Sears would send out their technicians, and their technicians, who still exist, by the way. Sears Home Service is actually pretty good. But they would send out their technicians, and they would do labor and parts that cover everything. But I mean, think about that for a second. These are programs where you would pay for them, and they used to be presented as extremely good values, to where something like if you needed to fix your washer and dryer for your clothes, the parts might cost you $300 or $400, and then the labor was another $100, $200. Well, the yearly household coverage would be something like only $400 or $500. So one service usually was worth buying it for. And of course, the Sears company and other companies that have done similar programs were banking that the likelihood of you needing this, because of the build quality of items back then, was significantly lower. I know we've gone off this huge tangent, but trust me, we're circling back to fish. So how does this apply to fish equipment? Well, back in the 70s and 80s, 60s even, equipment was built significantly different. And let me give you an example. This is old trusty. This is an Ebo Jaeger, the original Jaeger heater. This bad boy is 35 plus years old. This thing is old, and it works perfectly to this day. Now, here's something you should know, right? Look how long the heater is. This is 150 watts, okay? It's pretty big for a 150 watt heater. But what might be more important to understand, and we can get it close in a second, is In a modern heater, the heating element would be about this long. This is how far the heating element goes in this heater. You see a difference? And let's bring it up close. You can see the construction, right? The coils are a bit more spaced. There's literally, in some of the older designs made by different companies, not necessarily EBO, but there are these designed non-plastic parts to hold everything in, and some of them would be ridged. So they would literally be laying the wire into this little cavity that was perfectly designed to hold it and prevent them from being too close to each other. It acted as a minor insulator. And what that did is it prevented the coils from getting too hot. Now, you might be like, well, as a heater, you need it to get up. What can happen very frequently is when these coils are too close together and they get very hot, they are potentially going to overheat and cause failure in the coil. Now, the filament, if you look at this, right? Boom. There we go. If we look at the filaments on these, they're quite robust. I mean, they look very tiny, but they're a lot more robust than a lot of the modern heaters are. And because the temperature controllers that sit inside these things that are up here a little bit, that detect, because you have a little gauge on top to set your temperature, and this is the on-off, that temperature controller is much more simplistic than a lot of modern micro PC board controllers that are put into things. And what happens is that simplicity builds durability. These were built and designed to run for 15, 20 years, minimum 10. I can remember that when you bought a lot of your heaters, many of the heaters back in the day had surprisingly long warranties on them. The Ebo Jaeger was like the best in the industry. Now, if we compare that to a modern day heater, we'll use a picture here of a heating element to show you, like, they're much closer together. There's a lot of just filler space in these things, and what ends up happening is, more often than not, because that heat is more compacted and the temperature controller sits a little closer, they get so hot that they fry the temperature controllers, and then that's when your heaters either stick on or just completely shut down and don't even turn on in the first place. These designs, as they have shifted over time, are designed where a warranty is only like a year. What they really want now is similar to a shift that has happened in a lot of other places, the automobile industry, a lot of your like appliance manufacturing industry, is they try to add on all these little features or conveniences to increase the perceived value of the item, but all this complication and the necessity to make the parts cheaper and cheaper for bigger profit margins basically makes it so that they really are only designed to last just as long as the warranty and nothing longer. If they do, great. But realistically, a lot of the equipment we're dealing with nowadays, especially for our aquariums, are designed to only last as long as the warranty is in place, because the idea in the head is that we will get so used to, like, this is the normal for everything, that we'll just keep rebuying that heater because, hey, at least the warranty was a year, that other one over there is only 90 days, so this one's way better, even though they could very well be manufactured by the same manufacturer in China. The next major example of how companies have shifted their things, and we'll talk specifically in the aquarium industry, to basically design products to fail on you more, so that you'll have to replace them rather than fix them. If you look at like the old Marineland bio wheels when they first came out in the 80s, every single part on a bio wheel was easily removable and something you could purchase. And they used to have these little, like, up by the bio wheels themselves, they had these open slots in the cover to where you could see the bio wheel moving. Nowadays, they use a clear plastic, or they'll build in a little plastic window. But this was literally an open slot, so you could see it moving and watch as things happened. And over time, if your motor went out, or you needed a new impeller, or you needed a new this, you needed a new that, every single little part was available and modular. You can see this still a little more commonly in like Eheim canister filters, because Eheim has, for the most part, kept a lot of their parts available and separate so that fixing something is possible. But what has occurred for those that stay modular, the AquaClear is another good example. You can buy basically every part of an AquaClear separate. But the problem is, the cost of those things have gone up to the point of where they are encouraging you to effectively just buy a new one. As an example, like the motor or the casing for an AquaClear, just that one part, not anything else, is about 50 to 60% of the cost of buying an entirely brand new filter. And usually when you buy those parts individually directly from Hagen, Fluval, whoever, you have to pay shipping. Well, if you go buy a new filter often off Amazon, you're not paying shipping, right? So it adds a little extra cost, and to a point of where it almost encourages us to buy something else. But a majority of other products have changed to where they're no longer making the parts available. They're not modular. A great example of this, even though I like this filter a lot, is the Seachem Tidal. It's very difficult to get parts for that filter. There's only a couple things that are made available, and beyond that, if you're missing something, you kind of have to email their customer service and pray they're going to be nice, because otherwise you're not getting replacements in any way, shape, or form. There's not an easier storefront, or at least the last time I checked, not so much. Let's go back to that BioWheel, right? The BioWheel used to be every part was available, and now what has slowly happened, and this is in lots of filters, it is not just the BioWheel, I want to be really clear. Many modern filters are like this. The parts are kind of being fused together in housings that make it so that you can't buy each individual little part, you have to buy one larger piece, if it's even offered. So that when something fails, rather than replacing one small part like an impeller, you always have to replace the entire motor. And this adds a significantly larger cost, and what it really ends up doing is either A, making it so that us as consumers who want to repair things have to buy a more expensive piece of equipment when we might not have needed that entire piece, or B, we get frustrated to the point of where, like, oh, it's just not even worth getting a new one, I'll just go buy another new filter. And it brings them in a larger amount of profit rather than offering more modular parts to where you could pull apart your motor, pull apart your impeller, pull apart this, and get into this one little gasket that's inside it. You used to be able to order these kind of things. Nowadays, for a lot of modern equipment, you cannot. You have to either order an entirely new unit, the whole shebang, or it's like, oh, well, every part of the pump motor is just in this one unit. We make it so you can't really tear it apart and replace individual parts. You just got to buy a whole new pump. It kind of sucks. And this is prevalent all over the place. Let me give you a non-fish example. And people will probably love this and hate at the same time. Tesla. Their chairs in their cars. If you look at a lot of like older cars, like before I had my current vehicle, I had an old Mustang, right? And if something went wrong in the chair in my Mustang, like it had a little power seat, there were lots of little individual parts that could be ordered and replaced that were a lot easier to source and made the repair cheaper. Nowadays, what happens in a lot of modern cars, and Tesla's probably like the biggest offender of this, is that the chair is like one enclosed unit, every little being. So even if a small little board is going wrong, which I've had a problem with, this is the only major repair I've had to do to my vehicle, I had a board that would short the fuse every time you tried to move the chair. Something was just wrong, and it's kind of weird because it started happening when it was in for service, but that's not the matter. Something that wasn't covered under warranty. And I remember asking, okay, well, how much does it cost to replace the board? They told me, oh, no, you have to replace the entire chair. You can't just order an individual part. Well, how much is it to replace the chair? And that chair part was over $2,000. Just the chair. Just the driver's seat. Right? Because it's this one big unit. It's got computers and all sorts of stuff built into it and all these motors and things. And they make it one singular piece instead of being modular to where you can access everything and replace individual parts. You just replace an entire chair. Why? Because it's easier for them, instead of stocking lots of little parts, to just stock one replacement chair. And in the end, they end up making more profit because the cost of the unit allows for a larger unit of profit than those individual small pieces. And this is kind of a philosophy that has hit a lot of places, but the aquarium industry is certainly guilty of it. So the understanding of, instead of having these huge warehouses of parts and modular parts, so that you could buy, this one little thing, it's a $10 part. Why buy a $100 filter? I can buy a $10 part and fix it, right? All the space it takes to warehouse all these things and all these individual parts, having people go pick them and ship them individually, compared to making you buy one larger part, like the entire pump motor, or the entire this, or in the case of like a heater, well, the heater just fails, nothing's going to work, you need to do it and go get a new one. It's easier on companies, and they end up making higher levels of profit. And so that's where we start seeing this shift toward parts. And as an example, there is a well-known heater that is out there that has a light in it, a specific light that after 2 years of use turns on to tell you, replace me, no matter what. Even if I'm still working just fine, you should be replacing me. Now, from a certain perspective, you'd be like, well, it's letting you know that, like, hey, this thing is probably likely to fail on you after this period of time. But when it's designed with the knowledge that you're going to turn on a little LED that says, you've been used for this amount of time, it's time to replace me, on an electronic piece of hardware, when this thing is 35 plus years old and still works like a charm, kind of tells you there's a difference in the design philosophy of how our modern manufacturers make things like heaters, things like filters and lights. They're all designed to last only a certain amount of time, which is much less than it used to be. Now, often this is because there's a lot more complexity. There's all these extra small microchips and boards and things that weren't in these more simplistic pieces of hardware from days gone by. And that complexity adds a higher level of failure rate because there's more points in which something can go wrong. Simplicity makes things less likely. This is points of failure in my industry. It's also on the companies to design with an intent. And what it really came down to is when they made devices like this that would last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they weren't selling many of them, and it was hurting the overall company's long-term profit and growth. And companies need to run their businesses. We get that. But when you design to a point of where something tells you after a year or two, you need to replace me, that's really, really terrible as a consumer. Knowingly designing stuff where they're trying to milk money out of us more often and more frequently. And if we keep buying the cheaper thing that dies faster, we end up spending a lot more money than if we bought the one really nice one that is designed to last a lot longer. There's one last little story I want to tell, and we're going to end this. As this process, this shift was occurring, especially in the 80s and 90s, there were a number of engineers who were present in some of these meetings or with some of their bosses when they were making these design philosophy shifts in a number of different industries, but the aquarium industry is one of them. And those engineers got so fed up they left their companies and started new ones. New ones. They built new ones because they cared about product quality. They cared about giving good value, and most engineers do. It's usually people far above those engineers who are the ones going, design it to do this. But those engineers left to make other companies. And there are some great examples out there if you dig into the history. Cobalt's kind of actually one of those, where that was a group of people who left a larger company and wanted to build their own company to build quality items. Now, can we say that that's different from when they founded versus now? I'm not going to get into that part. But this has happened in a number of different industries. And what we can hope is that evolution doesn't stop, and that you will occasionally see young companies form with that same mentality in mind. We want to produce a better product for customers to give them a better value so that when they're buying that heater, instead of buying the $20 heater, they might be buying a $50 heater. But our $50 heater isn't going to have a little LED light in it in 2 years that says, time to replace me. Right? Or it's not going to have a motor that is one singular housing, and even when you know just an impeller needs to be replaced, can't do that. You got to buy a whole new motor. You can hope that those kind of things continue to happen and we keep seeing an evolution in our industry. Because otherwise what's going to happen is the more and more that they can get away with, the more they're going to do. They're going to try and get every dime out of us they can. I know this is a little bit of a ramble video, and I apologize, but I think it's important to understand like the philosophical shift over time that has happened in a lot of industries. It is not just the aquarium industry. I want to be really clear, because this happens in the automotive industry, it happens in the appliance industry, the electronics industry, any kind of piece of gear, so to speak. This is happening. And one of the things that, or has happened, let's be honest, it has happened. But I wanted to talk about it from a perspective and understanding some of the history of certain items in fish keeping. And there are some others. We could look at like old heaters and all sorts of stuff. We could do a historical walkthrough of certain things if we really wanted to. And if you're interested in that, leave a comment down below and let me know, because I've got a friend who would love to come and talk about the history of certain pieces of equipment in the aquarium industry. And yeah, we like I said, this is one of my friends. I've talked to a number of my friends in the industry, and this conversation, like last week's talking about fish or some other stuff, I mean, these are 3-4 hour conversations where we're just going back and forth. I'm taking hordes of notes that are way more than I can put into a single video. But there's just things that I think is important for us as consumers to understand, so that when we look at something, we don't look at it as like, oh, that's a good feature. We might look at it as in two, because like, but why is it a feature? Right? Why? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's the pump housing is one thing, but how come no replacement parts are available on this thing? And when you see stuff like that, you might start considering shying away from the items that don't allow you to replace parts when a part fails, forcing you to buy an entire new filter or whatever the heck it may be, right? That's where I think it's important for us as consumers to understand that when some features are added, they aren't always for our benefit. Many times they are. I want to be really clear. That light that tells you, hey, it's been 2 years, in modern day heaters, actually a decent feature, because it lets you know, like, oh, geez, I've had this running for at least this long. Maybe I should have it on a temperature controller, or maybe I should get a replacement because it's not super expensive. Whatever that may be, whatever your preference is, but it allows you to take those extra precautions so that you don't have that day where you come in and your fish room smells horrible, like some kind of disgusting fish soup, and you see all your fish floating because the heater's stuck on and fried them. Right? No one wants that day. We would much rather have that little light that turns on and it's like, hey, I'm at least 2 years old. Think about that for a second, buddy. Right? We all would much prefer that. But when it's designed into a product, we might think to ourselves, is that the best one to buy? And we need to weigh that decision really importantly. As always, my friends, I want to thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed this series. So if you do have ideas, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the history of certain pieces of equipment, or maybe you're just done with all this kind of product quality level stuff and you're just like, Bentley, give me something different. Let me know in the comments down below. Give it a thumbs up if you like this video. And as always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome.